Hey, everybody. I hope that you are happy and healthy and staying safe and sane in these very, very weird times that we're all experiencing. Uh, Obviously, we can't go out and make more episodes because we can't travel anywhere, and that is what it is. We have to accept it and carry on with life as best as we can until things come back to some semblance of normality sometime in the future. But I thought that I would take this opportunity to answer a lot of the questions that we get on a regular basis whenever we post an episode. I also put a message out on Twitter and Instagram and a few other platforms to ask if you had any burning questions that you wanted me to answer while we were all cooped up in our houses and homes and flats and apartments all over the world. So here we go. I will dive straight into it. You guys were very generous with your questions, and I really, really appreciate it. The first one, a lot of you have asked, so I've taken it and kind of put it into one question, which is what inspired me to start Attaché? Great question. A lot of people ask me that. Well, here's the genesis story, if you will. I travel a lot for my work, my big boy job, which is spending a lot of time on stage all over the world giving speeches. And I would find myself rocking up in a city and knowing I'm only going to be there for 6, 7, 8 hours just to get there, give the speech, and go home. But so never really an opportunity to appreciate a city as much as I would want to. And I would find myself in the taxi from the airport to the hotel going, crap, how do you say thank you in Dutch? Or, is it offensive to tip? Or is it the right thing to do? And most travel information, guidebooks, websites, they tell you a lot of the fluff, a lot of the touristy stuff, which is useful in some regards, but they skip over some of the stuff that is actually really useful as well. So I thought I better start writing this stuff down. And Attaché actually started as an app that I was building with my friend Greg Annandale, just to serve my own purposes so that I could pull up a city and see the basic information I needed. A few key phrases, values of things, costs of things, tipping protocol, things like that. And you can see where the show started to be born here. So we built that for a long time. And at the same time, I was reading, as you guys, a lot of you have figured out, a lot of Anthony Bourdain. My brother Will Hunter, who introduced me to Anthony Bourdain, really got me kind of hooked into what he was doing. And then I started reading the books and watching the shows. And for me, it was the kind of thing that I realized that wasn't being produced, was this sort of middle ground between the amazing documentary work that people like Anthony Bourdain were doing and the kind of really brochureware stuff aimed at old people with deep pockets, frankly. And then vlogging, just here's what I'm doing, day to day kind of stuff. I thought there's got to be a middle ground. So I got in touch with Greg, who is Will's college flatmate and best man, co-best man at his wedding, and said, listen, can I borrow you for half a day? I have this idea. And sure enough, he was very generous with his time and, of course, his expertise. We went to London Paddington Station for 4 hours and filmed a pilot. And I said to him afterwards, please burn that because I think it's going to be the cringiest thing I've ever done. He said, maybe, but let me tinker with it and we'll see what comes back. And sure enough, he did and produced the most wonderful piece of, he did what he could do with the material that I gave him, and it was great. And it was a pilot, and we put it out there, and the rest is history. 40-something episodes later, here we are. So the long answer, or the short answer to the long answer is, I was scratching my own itch. That's why I started Attaché. I have to unlock my screen now because I need to read the questions. So another question that a lot of people have been asking for years now since the show started is, how do we pick our cities? Well, there's a few ways for us to look at it, and we kind of have a formula, but it's not a very rigid one. One of the things that's really important to me is, are people looking for this information on YouTube? And we can see from the number of searches that people are doing for specific cities or keywords, are they looking for content about a city? And then if they are, is the content that's on YouTube doing that city justice? And if no, then we really have an opportunity there, and almost an obligation as well. And probably the third and most important one for me is it somewhere that we want to go? Is it somewhere that is exciting and we feel like we could tell an interesting story about and get excited about and really flex our creative muscles to an extent? And there's a lot of sort of, it doesn't, one is not more important than the other in terms of those criteria. So we just, if a deal comes up on a flight, or a partner gets in touch and says, hey, we'd love for you to come and visit city X or country X, and if it's compelling or interesting, then we do it. So there's a lot of factors for us to decide on it. But for me, the most important one is I've always wanted to go to wherever, and I think we could do a really good episode there. And if we can put together a production budget and format and schedule and find the right people on the ground to create something that we'd both be proud of, then we do it. We absolutely do it. Gotta unlock my screen again. I need to turn that off. I'm gonna do that. The next question is a really good one. What's the one place you really want to visit that you haven't got around to yet? That's an easy one. Iran. I have wanted to go and do an episode in Iran for years now. I am completely fascinated by that country. When I worked for Richard Branson, I had a colleague who was Iranian. She was from Shiraz, and she would tell me all these amazing stories about her home city and her home country, these pictures, these foods. And ever since then, and we're talking like 10 years ago, I have been obsessed with that country, and I've just wanted to go ever since. We actually started putting the pieces together to do an episode there, and the travel ban, the US travel ban came into effect, and then things kind of fell apart in the world. So we've tried 3 times to do an episode there. If you don't watch Indigo Traveler, another travel YouTuber, Kiwi, just an extraordinary guy, goes to the most amazing places that none of us would go to, and he's the most charming, engaging person, and people just sort of flock to him. And he did a really amazing video taking the train through Iran, and that again kind of reignited this passion of mine to go back there. So Iran is very, very high on the list. I don't know when, or frankly even if, we're going to get there. They've suffered immeasurably with coronavirus, and of course we're wishing everybody in that situation and beyond the best. But stay tuned, because it's very, very high. It's number one on the list, places to go. Okay, next question. I like this. This is from Teacup Chinese on YouTube. Where are you actually from? Very neutral accent you have. You would not believe how often I get asked that question, both on YouTube and in my life generally, going to the store or whatever, coming off stage. I get Canadian a lot. I am not Canadian. I love Canada, but I'm not Canadian. My roots are complicated, and my accent is complicated. I was born in Virginia to British parents. My father was in the Air Force and stationed at Dulles, but I left when I was about 2 months old, moved to California, where I spent the first 10 years of my life. Then I moved to Hong Kong for 10 years, but went to a British boarding school. And when I left university, I got engaged and I moved back to California for 7 years. Now I live in England, and I split my time between California and the UK. My kids have very weird accents too. My brothers, I have 2 brothers who you've seen in various episodes. One is very, very kind of Hugh Grant level British.
You'll notice that it's lots of Germans here as well as tourists, and it was just quite a nice place to come after work instead of the pub. Come here, a couple glühweins, cheese sausage, maybe some kartoffel. Jobs are good.
And my youngest brother, Will, again, you've seen him in episodes, has this mid-Atlantic accent. He spent time in Boston and South Africa and now lives in California.
You're like, oh yeah, and then they're Spanish.
We all have this very weird collection of accents. So my accent is kind of unplaceable at the moment, and I kind of like it that way. So the next questions, there's 2 questions that are kind of related here, are about our kind of world situation right now. So what has coronavirus taught me in regards to travel? And do I think that the current situation will change how and how much we travel in the future? Boy, yeah, I think, my dear friend Paul Papadimitriou, who I co-host Layovers with the Air Travel podcast, he believes the golden age of air travel and travel in general is over. And I'm inclined to agree with him. I think it's going to take years before we ever get back to even a sense of what we've all enjoyed for decades now. And that's a tragedy, because I think a lot of people are going to lose their jobs. A lot of businesses are going to cease to be. and countries that are dependent on tourism are really, really going to suffer. So there's a massive human cost here. I think that the freedom with which we've had to travel, visa free, no need for health certificate, that's all gone. At least in the short term, there are going to have to be a lot more stringent checks about who's going where and how and where have they been in the past. And that will be an inconvenience, but only an inconvenience. We are so fortunate to be able to travel as much as we have been able to travel in the past, and we should never ever take that for granted, whether it's for business or for pleasure. But I think that it's never going to be the same, which is heartbreaking to say, but we'll get used to it. We'll adapt. New opportunities will come out of this, and we'll still be able to share wonderful stories and eat wonderful food and meet wonderful people. It's just going to be done in a slightly different way. I like this question. This next one from Joey Jack Bauer. Have you ever totally filled your passport pages with stamps? Yes, I have. Which is pretty crazy because I have a British passport and an American passport. And my British passport, when I'm traveling anywhere in the EU, at least for a few more months, I don't need to get it stamped. So that was filled with visas and stamps from countries where I did need a stamp outside of the EU. So yes, I did that maybe 2 years ago, and I couldn't quite believe it. It was almost like saying goodbye to an old friend that's traveled hundreds of thousands of miles with me. But yes, I have filled an entire passport with stamps. Next question. Have you talked to any streaming services to pick up Attaché? Boy, there's a story there. So, yes, I have. And we have been approached a few times. We get asked this question quite a lot. We've had conversations with Netflix years ago before we were ready, and a few others, the BBC. But we actually had a web series on the Travel Channel, and it was awful. It was not fun. The process was not fun at all. I hated every second of it. I was not proud of what we produced. It's very difficult to find. You couldn't watch it outside of the US because it was geofenced, which to me makes no sense because that the web is supposed to be international and democratic in terms of content. But the whole process was not fun at all. We had producers, we had people kind of meddling, giving us notes. If you're a Simpsons fan like I am, if you remember the Simpsons episode with Krusty and the network executives, it was that. They are a good organization, the Travel Channel. It wasn't right for us at all. And ever since then, and we're talking like 3 or 4 years ago that this happened, I've been really, really uncomfortable with the idea of not doing this myself, which has meant some sacrifices in terms of funding and budget, but it also means total creative freedom. It's just me and Greg that do this, so we don't have to answer to anybody, even partners. We're very explicit up front, saying we'd love to work with you, but we have total creative control, and invariably they have no problem with that. So we'll see what the future holds. I like this format. We've been able to find the balance of length and production budget and content, and reasonably okay with the amount of times we release episodes, although it's hard because we have to go to these places, which is why it takes a little bit of time. But we'll see. Maybe if a conversation takes place in a few years, I might change my mind. But for now, I'd rather not. And now my screen has gone off. Next question is from Keegan Miley. Keegan, apologies if I've mispronounced your name. Is Australia, specifically Melbourne, on your list? If not, why? Of course Australia is on our list. It's absolutely on our list. And you're not going to believe this, but I should be in Australia right now. I had a trip booked, planned, all ready to go. It wasn't for filming, but I was going to do a little bit of filming for my own and probably put it on the channel. But unfortunately, that never came to be for obvious reasons. So yes, it remains very highly on the list. I have friends all over Australia from my time growing up in Hong Kong, and I can't wait to get out there and film. Melbourne is high on the list. I want to go see Joel Candia in Perth because he's just got the food situation there down, and plus he's a super nice guy. So yeah, very, very keen to do that as soon as we can. It will be this year. I mean, if things carry on with the way they are with travel, I think 2020, if we can get an Australia episode in 2020, I think we'll have done really well. But yes, of course, it's very high on the list. It's just about as far away from where I live and Greg as you can get. So it takes a little bit more planning to do, but we'll get there, I promise. Next question. If you were to travel to one city in each continent, which cities would they be? Wow, that's a hell of a question. Okay, North America. Let's do ones that I haven't done an episode in yet because otherwise it's too easy, I think. Maybe. I don't know. We'll find out as we go along. Okay, North America, Chicago. Love that city so much. It's a crime we haven't done an episode there. That one was easy. Europe. You know, I was going to say Lisbon. We just did a Lisbon episode, and you could see from the episode how much I love that city. I think Helsinki. I've been there many times. We haven't done an episode. I have family history there. My grandfather was stationed there when he was in the Air Force and spoke very, very fondly of it. So I think that's very high on the list. Africa, Dakar in Senegal. I would love to go there. I would love to film an episode there. I mean, Africa's huge. I could give you 10 cities there that I would want to do. So, yes, that Dakar in Senegal is probably my next big one. Asia, flippin' heck. Probably somewhere in Thailand. Although, actually, you know what? Kuala Lumpur. For a couple of reasons. One, my mother was born there. And two, it's one of those cities that every time I go there, I have a massively different experience from the last time I was there. And again, such a huge continent. We've got lists for every continent of where we want to go. But I think that's probably on my list. Oceania. Well, we haven't done it yet. I think Perth. I think Perth is number one on my list for an episode and to visit for a lot of reasons. I think it's a city that people wouldn't immediately go, oh, you're going to be in Australia. Of course you're going to do Perth over Sydney or Melbourne or anywhere like that. There's something about the West Coast that I think I want to explore a little bit more. South America. Medellin, Colombia. Greg went there a few years ago and literally has not shut up about it since. And I think or Bogota, both, probably both, but and for the exact same reasons. So I think that's really high on the list as well, and would be number one in South America. Did we do all of them? Did I forget one? Probably. My sons used to know this song about the continents, and now I can't remember it either. So if I forgot one, I'll add it in edit. I think we're good, though. Great question. Let's see, next one. Where did you grow up, and how was the culture of your community? Well, I told you where and how I grew up. Very itinerant lifestyle. The culture and community varied massively depending on where I was at each stage in my life. I grew up in suburban California first 10 years of my life, so it was super easy. Little league, trick-or-treating, all of the stereotypes, very Malcolm in the Middle. It was great. I loved it, walking to school and all that stuff. In Hong Kong, very different. For those of you that know Hong Kong, I spent 7 years in Clearwater Bay and just under 4 years in Causeway Bay, Happy Valley, actually. And I loved it. That was a great place to grow up and kind of become a teenager and then into an adult. Boarding school in between, which is weird. Not nearly as Harry Potter as it sounds. And then in California, just kind of dotting around. And now in the 10 years I've been back in England, I've bounced between London and very rural England, which is where I live now. And I'm a city guy, so it takes a little bit of getting used to. But right now, with lots of open space, it's great. So the communities have varied wildly. It was very important for me in hindsight, to grow up in a city in Hong Kong where I was the minority, where I looked different. I didn't understand what anybody was saying. It was hot. It was crowded. It was very different from what I grew up in. That was a very grounding and humbling experience, which I've kind of kept with me my whole life. So that, I think, was invaluable. But great question. Never thought about that before. Let's see. From Paul DeLong the Watchtower on Instagram. Clever username. How do you find the best quote-unquote local bars, pubs, restaurants that you highlight in a city? Great question. In the first maybe 15 episodes, we leaned heavily on Reddit. So we would go to the city subreddit and ask. And the cream would invariably rise to the top, but what we did find was that it wasn't always representative of a local cuisine or experience. It was just that one place that everybody liked. So in Boston, the number one recommendation was a kind of straight Singaporean restaurant, which it was good. We did go there, but it wasn't. I mean, there's so much that's idiosyncratically Bostonian that didn't rise to the top necessarily. So we sort of naturally moved away from that. We started getting in touch with food writers like Kalyan Karmakar, who we worked with on our Mumbai and Delhi episode, and he's now become a dear friend to sort of take us by the hand when we were there and really not just take us to a restaurant, but talk food culture and habits and ingredients and etiquette and all that stuff. So we did a lot more of that, where we would work with food writers, food bloggers, food travel company founders, chefs all over the world. And that yielded so much better information and content, quite frankly. And then in some instances, we'd find places by accident where we would just be walking down a street from, shooting location A to shooting location B and go, what the hell was that? That we need to go back there and see what that is. And we would go and eat there and have the meal of our lives, and it would become a segment in the show. Same with at the end of the day, we've walked 15 miles and, it's 32 degrees outside, Celsius, not Fahrenheit, and we want a beer. We find a place in it. There's so many stories come out of that. So it really depends, but those are the resources that we pull from. And sometimes we share the places that we've been to, and sometimes we don't. And there's reason there. We don't want places to get overwhelmed. Not that we've got any kind of footprint that would cause that, but there's something rather wonderful about finding a place and then it becoming your little secret, and you go back there and it hasn't changed, and you go back and you go back and you go back. And we have places like that, in Hong Kong and Tokyo, where we've been back a number of times, and I rather like that. It's quietly magical. Favorite city I've ever lived in, from no_e_k on Instagram. He or she has lived in San Francisco, Hong Kong, London. Oh, wow, okay. Same team. And miss San Francisco every day. My favorite city I've lived in by far, without even a competition, is Hong Kong. I adore that city. I am massively emotionally invested in it. I am proud of it, especially now over the last couple of years with what they've been enduring. I love that city so much. London took me a while to get used to, but now it's one of my favorite cities in the world. I love London. San Francisco has its own struggles, but the Bay Area is where my heart is. So I love them all, but Hong Kong is the favorite of my children, which is kind of a weird thing to say, but the question is kind of like asking me which is my favorite kid. And I think Hong Kong is probably my favorite kid. Let's see here. What did you study at university? Haha. Okay. So, I dropped out of university twice. Look at me now. No, it's fine. First thing I did was I studied linguistics. English language and linguistics, because I loved it at school. I was good at it. I found it fascinating, but it was super boring at university. And I was at university here in England, and it wasn't not my thing. The place that I was at, Colchester in Essex, if you know it, oldest town in the UK, Roman, obviously by definition. I just didn't feel it. I lasted 6 months and bailed. And took some time off, went to work back in Hong Kong, which kind of gave me a really good grounding for the rest of my life. Tried again, went to the University of Kent, not too far from where I am now. Studied business, loved it. Played American football for the university, loved that. Met some lifelong friends there. Also met the woman I would later marry. Asked her to marry me. And moved to California after a year of university. And then, the rest is history. I did okay. I'm very comfortable with my station in life. But neither of them, did either of them play into Attaché? No, not really. I always liked business, especially marketing. That's kind of what I did slash do for a living. The psychology of marketing. But yeah, that's it's kind of a boring story, but it's a good question. I get asked that a lot, especially in my kind of other life of being professional, speaking, marketing, douchebag. Douchebag. And finally, there's a few questions here that I don't think I can answer. I think I'm going to need some help with. So I'm going to do a separate video where we answer some of the technical questions that only Sir Greg Bonniez can answer. So if you have questions for Greg, let us know, and we will pitch them as well, because I've got quite a few that there's no freaking way that I'm going to be able to answer. But until then, thank you for doing this. What a great idea, all of you. Thanks for your questions and for your time, and thank you for watching. We literally wouldn't exist without you.